Waitress injured in car crash. Children cry as billionaire rushes her to hospital. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long, golden streaks across the city streets. Clara's old sedan crawled through the afternoon traffic, the weight of her exhaustion pressing on her shoulders like an invisible force. She stole glances at her children in the back seat, Emma, age 7, with her unruly curls and wide, curious eyes, and Leo, 5, clutching his tiny backpack straps like a lifeline. Their chatter about school projects and playground adventures filled the car, yet Clara barely heard them. Her mind was elsewhere, juggling unpaid bills, late shifts at the cafe, and the gnawing fear that she might never be able to give her children a life they deserved. Clara gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles whitening. Every intersection seemed more dangerous than the last, every honking horn a warning. She wasn't speeding, she wasn't reckless, yet being a mother had conditioned her to anticipate disaster at every corner. Just yesterday, she had watched a neighbor's dog run into the street, narrowly avoiding a cyclist, and the memory of that panic still made her chest tighten. She knew life could be fragile, and that knowledge had a way of sharpening every decision, every movement. The city streets were alive with their usual chaos, honking cars, the occasional shout from a street vendor, children running across crosswalks without a care in the world. Clara's eyes flicked between the rear-view mirror and the lanes ahead, counting the blocks to her children's school. It should have been a routine drive, one she had done countless times. But today, everything felt wrong, as if the air itself had thickened, warning of the calamity to come. Then it happened. A sleek, black car came hurtling from the cross street, its engine roaring like a predator. Clara's heart leapt into her throat. She slammed her foot on the brake and jerked the wheel instinctively. The world seemed to move in slow motion, the black vehicle smashing through the red light, its metal body gleaming cruelly in the dying sunlight, the screech of tires piercing her ears. Her car lurched violently as the other vehicle clipped her side. The sound was deafening, a violent, metallic crunch followed by the sickening snap of twisting metal. Glass shattered like rain around them, slicing the air with sharp edges. Emma screamed. Leo wailed. Clara's stomach dropped as adrenaline surged, mingled with pure terror. Her hands shook violently as she checked on them, desperately trying to shield them from shards of glass and the residual shock. Emma's small hands trembled, her face pale and wet with tears. Leo's cries were piercing, raw, and unrelenting, stabbing Clara's heart with each sob. She wrapped her arms around them as best she could, whispering frantic reassurances she barely believed herself. "It's okay, we're okay, it's okay." Across the street, a man had witnessed the entire scene. Michael Hawthorne, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, paused momentarily, assessing the chaos. He had been attending a charity gala nearby, moving through the crowd with his usual quiet composure when his gaze fell on the accident. The sight of Clara's car, crumpled and surrounded by screaming children, triggered something deep within him, a reflexive, urgent need to act. Without hesitation, he ran toward them, weaving deftly through the growing crowd of onlookers. Clara struggled to unbuckle her children from their car seats, her fingers numb with shock. Michael reached them in moments, his presence commanding yet calm. "Are you all okay? Stay calm. Help is on the way," he said, his deep voice both firm and comforting. Clara could only nod, too stunned to speak, as tears streamed down her face. With swift, practiced movements, Michael helped guide the children out of the car and into his arms, steadying them as Clara struggled to remain composed. "We'll get you somewhere safe," he said. "Come with me." Though Clara was wary of a stranger, the urgency in his eyes left her no room for hesitation. She trusted him, not because she knew him, but because in that moment he was all that stood between them and further harm. Michael led them to his car, easing the children into the back seat and securing them safely. He moved with precision, as if life itself had trained him for emergencies like this. Clara buckled herself in, heart hammering, mind racing with worry and disbelief. The black car, the one that had shattered their afternoon, was gone. Its driver had fled the scene, leaving a trail of chaos in his wake. Clara's stomach churned with anger and fear. How could someone hit another car, endanger children, and simply vanish? As Michael drove, weaving expertly through traffic, Clara's mind replayed the accident repeatedly, the horrifying images refusing to fade. She gripped her children's hands, feeling their small bodies shudder with residual fear. Michael glanced at her through the rearview mirror, his expression softening. "You're stronger than you realize," he said quietly. Clara wanted to believe him, but the tears flowing freely from her eyes told a different story. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as they navigated the city streets. Every red light, every honking car, reminded Clara of the fragility of life. Yet Michael's calm presence, the steady rhythm of his voice, and the simple fact that he had intervened brought a strange sense of relief. For the first time since the crash, she allowed herself a flicker of hope. When they finally arrived at the hospital, Clara's legs felt like lead. Her body was trembling, not just from shock, but from sheer exhaustion. Michael insisted on accompanying them inside, guiding them gently past the triage desk and ensuring that her children were taken in for examination without delay. Nurses rushed forward, their movements efficient, compassionate, and immediate. Clara's mind was a whirlwind of gratitude, disbelief, and lingering fear. She had survived the nightmare, yet she barely knew the man who had become her lifeline. As the children were led away for treatment, Michael handed Clara a card. "If you need anything, call me. I'll make sure you're okay." Before she could respond, he slipped away, blending into the hospital corridor like a guardian angel retreating to anonymity. Clara stood frozen, the card clutched tightly in her hand, overwhelmed by the sudden surge of emotion. In mere minutes, a stranger had transformed her world from one of panic and despair to one of safety and unexpected hope. She looked at the crumpled remnants of what had been her car in her mind's eye, and then at the hospital walls surrounding her. The chaos of the accident, the stolen safety by a fleeing driver, and the unanticipated kindness of a man she barely knew had left her shaken, yet strangely fortified. For Clara, nothing would ever be the same. Not the streets she drove on, not the trust she placed in strangers, and certainly not the profound realization that a single act of compassion could alter the course of a life forever. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and fear. Clara sat in the stiff, vinyl chair, her hands cradling a mug of lukewarm coffee that had long since lost its warmth. Hours had passed since the accident, yet every second seemed to stretch endlessly. Emma and Leo were in the pediatric ward, each tucked under soft blankets, eyes drooping from exhaustion and fear, though their injuries were thankfully minor. Clara, however, felt no relief. Her heart still raced, her chest tight with adrenaline and shock, and her mind replayed the accident in unending loops. She remembered the roar of the black car, the sickening crunch of metal, and the glass raining down around them. She relived the screams of her children, their tiny bodies trembling in fear, and her own futile attempts to shield them. And she remembered Michael, his calm presence cutting through the chaos, a lifeline she hadn't expected, a stranger who had turned her worst nightmare into something manageable. The door to the examination room opened, and Dr. Simmons stepped out, rubbing his temples with the exhaustion of a long day. "They're going to be okay," he said with a small but reassuring smile. Relief surged through Clara in a wave that left her trembling and weak. Her body, finally allowed to acknowledge the trauma it had endured, sagged in the chair. She felt tears sting her eyes, tears of both fear and relief. For the first time since the accident, she allowed herself a long, shuddering exhale. Her phone buzzed suddenly, jolting her from the fragile calm. She glanced down and froze. The screen displayed an unknown number. The message read, "Clara, it's Michael. Don't worry about anything. I want to help you and the kids." Clara's fingers trembled as she read and reread the message. She had never known a man like Michael. He was a stranger, yet in one day, he had done more for her and her children than anyone else ever had. Her mind struggled to comprehend the kindness he had shown. It felt unreal, too sudden, too generous. A lump formed in her throat. Who was this man, and why had he stepped in to help them so selflessly? She looked around the hospital room, at the bland walls and antiseptic smell, and felt a strange sense of vulnerability. She had always prided herself on her independence, on her ability to survive, to fight her way through life's harshest moments. But here in this sterile room, surrounded by beeping machines and sleeping children, she felt that fragile line between strength and helplessness blur. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps accepting help didn't make her weak. Days passed in a slow, surreal rhythm. Michael continued to check in, sometimes sending reassuring messages, sometimes showing up with food or small gifts for the children. Hospital bills, which Clara had been terrified she would never cover, were quietly taken care of. Arrangements were made for temporary care for Emma and Leo, freeing Clara to focus on recovering from the shock without worrying about who would watch over them. Every visit, every gesture, chipped away at the walls she had built around herself. She still struggled with the idea of depending on someone else, yet she couldn't deny the relief and gratitude swelling in her chest. Her children laughed quietly one afternoon, the sound soft and melodic, a balm to her frayed nerves. Watching them, she realized a profound truth: even the strongest people sometimes needed a lifeline. And for Clara, Michael had become that lifeline. But just as hope was beginning to feel tangible, the hospital room door opened again, this time revealing a stern-faced detective. His presence was sudden, sharp, and unwelcome in the fragile cocoon Clara had begun to build around herself. "We've identified the car that hit you," he announced, his voice grave. Clara's stomach tightened instantly. Her mind raced. "The driver? Who is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The detective handed her a thick manila file. Her hands shook as she opened it, and her eyes widened in disbelief. Inside were photos, registration papers, and insurance documents. The car that had turned her afternoon into chaos belonged to someone she could never have imagined, one of the city's most notorious businessmen. A man whose name alone carried fear, a man known for exploiting workers, evading legal consequences, and wielding power with impunity. Clara's heart raced. She had expected a reckless stranger, a careless driver, someone who could be held accountable without the weight of influence. Not someone untouchable, someone powerful enough to make her feel insignificant with a single glance. The air in the room seemed to thicken. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She looked up to see Michael entering, as if sensing the shift in the atmosphere. His gaze fell on the file in her hands, and his jaw tightened. He took the papers gently from her, his hands steady, his expression unreadable but intense. "Clara," he said softly, "we'll make sure justice is done." In that moment, Clara felt an overwhelming surge of emotion: fear, disbelief, anger, and strangely, hope. She had survived an accident that could have ended her children's lives. She had been saved by a man who, despite his wealth and influence, chose to act with compassion rather than indifference. And now, she realized, that same man was willing to fight with her, not just to recover what was lost, but to confront someone who had thought themselves untouchable. Her hands trembled as she closed the file and clutched it to her chest. The weight of reality pressed down on her, yet Michael's presence beside her offered a quiet reassurance. For the first time in what felt like years, she believed that survival wasn't just about enduring. It was about courage, about taking the first step to reclaim what had been nearly stolen from her family. As the detective took notes and prepared to leave, Clara glanced at Michael. There was a silent understanding between them, a bond forged in crisis, strengthened by shared determination. She realized that life had thrown them together for a reason, that the accident, horrifying as it had been, had created an opportunity for change, an opportunity for justice, for hope, and for a future she had never dared to imagine. For Clara, the hospital room was no longer just a place of injury and fear. It was the place where her world had shifted, where the fragile threads of chaos had been woven into something stronger. And as she watched her children sleep peacefully under the soft glow of the ward lights, she felt a quiet, resolute determination stir within her. She would fight, she would survive, and with Michael's unexpected help, she would reclaim her life. The first step had been terrifying. The next would be even more challenging. But Clara knew she was not alone, and in that knowledge, she found a strength she had never known she possessed. The weeks that followed the accident blurred together in a mix of hospital visits, recovery, and slowly rebuilding what had been nearly shattered. Clara's days had once been filled with the predictable rhythm of work, school runs, and late-night shifts, but now an unfamiliar presence had woven itself into her life. Michael Hawthorne, the stranger who had saved her and her children from the wreckage, had quietly become a part of their everyday existence. At first, Clara had been hesitant, even defensive. She was a woman who had fought her way through life alone, who had relied on no one but herself. Accepting help was not something she was accustomed to. And yet, every time Michael appeared, checking on the children, bringing groceries, helping arrange follow-ups with doctors, she found herself silently grateful, though she would never admit aloud. His presence was steady, a quiet reassurance amid the chaos that had engulfed her family, and gradually, she realized she didn't need to fight alone. Michael had a way of entering a room and immediately easing tension without demanding recognition or gratitude. The children, who had been timid and wary after the accident, began to warm to him almost instantly. Emma would dash to the door the moment he arrived, clutching her favorite doll, while Leo would tug at her sleeve, insisting she show Michael his latest drawing. Michael laughed softly at their antics, ruffling their hair or kneeling to meet them at eye level, never treating them as anything less than important. Clara observed these moments quietly, a mixture of relief and wonder tugging at her heart. One evening, after a long day of doctor appointments and errands, Clara tucked the children into bed. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the night outside and the occasional creak of floorboards. Michael had stayed behind to help with chores, and now he sat across from her at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in his hand, his gaze thoughtful. Clara, exhausted yet unable to sleep, found herself opening up in a way she had never done before. "You've been incredible," she said softly, her voice betraying a hint of vulnerability she usually hid. "I don't even know how to thank you for everything." Michael shook his head gently. "No thanks necessary. I didn't do it for that," he said, his voice calm but carrying a quiet intensity. "I just couldn't stand by. I've seen too many tragedies happen because people assumed someone else would step in." Clara studied him, intrigued. There was something about his presence, the way he carried himself, confident yet unassuming, that made her want to understand him. You don't have to help people. Most people in your position don't. Why me? Why my family?" Michael leaned back, his gaze distant, as if looking into a past only he could see. "I grew up in a world that's very different from yours," he admitted. "Wealth, privilege, it shields you from struggles most people face. I've been insulated from real life for as long as I can remember. I've watched disasters from the sidelines, powerless in my detachment, until I realized one small act could change everything." He paused, looking down at his hands. "Today it was you. Tomorrow it could be someone else." Clara felt her chest tighten. There was an honesty in his words, a raw sincerity that made the walls around her heart tremble. For so long, she had believed that life was cruel, that acts of genuine kindness were rare, and that people of power rarely cared about those beneath them. Michael was challenging every assumption she had made about the world. I never thought someone like you would care," she whispered. "It's hard to imagine that someone could just step in like that." Michael's lips curved into a faint smile, one that reached his eyes. Sometimes the unexpected becomes the most important. Their conversations that evening stretched long into the night. Clara found herself sharing details about her life she had never revealed to anyone, stories of her struggles as a single mother, the exhaustion of working long hours, the quiet victories of providing for her children despite everything stacked against her. Michael listened, truly listened, without judgment or interruption, offering only gentle reflections and encouragement. In return, he shared fragments of his own life, tales of growing up under immense pressure, of wealth that often felt like a cage, of moments where he felt disconnected from humanity despite everything money could buy. There was a strange symmetry in their stories, one life defined by struggle, the other by privilege, yet both shaped by isolation in their own ways. Clara realized that despite their differences, they shared a common understanding of responsibility, of the power of choices, and the impact a single person could have on the lives of others. Over the days, their bond deepened. Michael continued to visit, not to impose but to support, gradually becoming a constant presence in their lives. He helped Clara organize appointments, assisted with school paperwork, and even taught Leo how to ride his bicycle again, patient and encouraging. Emma took to reading aloud to him, thrilled by his attentiveness and gentle humor. Clara watched these interactions with a mixture of amazement and cautious hope. The children's laughter, once stifled by trauma, returned as a chorus that filled the house, and she knew that Michael had played an irreplaceable role in restoring that joy. Yet amid the warmth, there was a quiet tension beneath the surface, a sense that life could shift again without warning. Clara felt it in the way Michael sometimes glanced at her, a flicker of emotion that he quickly masked, as if burdened by unspoken truths. She sensed that he, too, carried his own fears, his own vulnerabilities, despite his composed exterior. One afternoon, as Clara sorted through paperwork in the living room, she paused, looking at Michael, who was seated on the sofa, sketching quietly in a notebook. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, her voice tentative. "Helping us, I mean." He looked up, meeting her gaze. For a moment, his expression softened, the stoic barrier he maintained slipping. "Regret," he repeated. "No, not for a second. But it's complicated. Once you step in, you can't step back. You become invested. You start to care deeply. And caring, sometimes that's heavier than anything I've ever faced." Clara nodded, understanding more than he could know. She, too, had carried the weight of responsibility alone for so long. She understood how love and duty could be both a source of strength and a burden. As the days turned into weeks, Clara allowed herself to hope. She dared to imagine a life where her family could feel safe and whole again. Michael's presence, steady and unwavering, had become a lifeline, not just for her children, but for her as well. For the first time in years, she felt that vulnerability did not equate to weakness. And yet, just as the house felt filled with laughter, light, and cautious optimism, Clara sensed a shadow approaching, an unexpected twist waiting to disrupt the fragile balance they had found. She didn't know what form it would take or when it would arrive, but a quiet instinct warned her. Life, she had learned, never allowed happiness to remain uninterrupted for long. The morning of the court hearing arrived with a tension that gripped Clara's chest like a vice. She had barely slept the hours before dawn, consumed by anxiety and anticipation. Emma and Leo sat quietly beside her on the courthouse bench, holding her hands tightly, sensing the gravity of the day. Clara's heart ached for them. She had shielded them as best she could from the trauma of the accident, but the fear lingered, a shadow they could not fully escape. Michael had insisted on accompanying them, arriving early in a quiet, unassuming car. Clara had grown accustomed to his presence over the past weeks, yet even she couldn't deny the sense of awe she felt seeing him enter the imposing courthouse halls, calm and confident amid the chaos. His demeanor was steady, almost magnetic, drawing attention without demanding it. For Clara, his presence was a lifeline, a reassurance that no matter what happened today, she would not face it alone. The courtroom was packed, the air heavy with anticipation. Journalists whispered among themselves, their cameras aimed at the entrance, though few noticed Clara and her children, seated quietly at the front. Then the doors opened. The driver, the man who had caused the accident that had nearly destroyed Clara's family, walked in, flanked by his attorneys. He carried himself with the arrogance of someone who had never faced consequences, his expensive suit impeccable, his smirk smug. Clara's stomach churned as her eyes locked onto his. There was no hint of remorse in his gaze, no acknowledgement of the chaos he had left behind. He was untouchable in his own mind, immune to the pain he had caused. Clara felt a wave of anger rise, but she pushed it down. She had learned in the past weeks that reacting impulsively would not serve her or her children. She needed to remain composed, to channel her fear and frustration into focus. Beside her, Michael's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, a silent signal that she was not alone. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. The hearing began, and the driver's attorneys started with their usual tactic, minimizing the incident, framing it as a minor accident, a mistake easily forgiven. Clara's chest tightened with every word. She could feel her children fidgeting beside her, sensing her anxiety. Then Michael stood. It was subtle at first, the rising authority in his posture, the quiet gravity in his voice that demanded attention. Clara had seen him in moments of crisis, guiding her family through chaos, but this was different. This was deliberate, strategic, and commanding. He had prepared meticulously, arranging evidence that painted a clear picture of the driver's reckless behavior. Traffic camera footage showing the car running a red light, eyewitness testimony, reports of prior reckless driving incidents, and detailed documentation of the injuries and trauma inflicted upon Clara's children. "Your Honor," Michael began, his voice steady and resonant, "we are not here to exaggerate or embellish. We are here to present the facts, the undeniable truth of what occurred that day. The defendant's actions were not accidental. They were reckless, negligent, and dangerous, endangering the lives of a mother and her children." Clara's breath caught in her throat as she watched him. He had always been reserved, careful with his words, yet now he spoke with precision and authority, leaving no room for doubt or dismissal. The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath as he laid out each piece of evidence, explaining clearly how the driver had ignored traffic signals, endangered others, and fled the scene like a coward. The driver's smirk faltered. For the first time, the arrogance that had shielded him cracked. Michael continued, drawing attention to the human cost of the reckless behavior, emphasizing the fear and trauma endured by Clara and her children. He spoke not just with logic, but with emotion, his words painting a vivid picture of pain, resilience, and the courage it took for a single mother to survive a nightmare that could have ended in tragedy. Clara felt tears sting her eyes. She had never expected to witness justice so boldly and completely laid bare. Michael's voice resonated with the quiet moral authority of someone who had not only acted but cared enough to ensure that accountability followed. She realized in that moment that justice was not just about punishment, it was about courage, about standing up when it mattered most, about speaking the truth when others tried to hide it behind wealth, power, or indifference. The driver shifted uneasily in his seat, his confidence visibly shaken. He had underestimated the reach of consequence, the inevitability of accountability, when someone refused to look the other way. Clara could see it in his eyes, the fear that came not from punishment alone, but from the realization that he was no longer untouchable. As Michael concluded his presentation, he turned to Clara. "You and your children have shown extraordinary courage," he said softly, ensuring that the driver, and everyone else in the room, understood the strength it had taken for them to survive and confront this day. No one should ever face what you endured without justice being served. The courtroom remained silent for a long moment, the weight of truth pressing down on everyone present. Clara's heart pounded, a mixture of relief and anticipation flooding her senses. The judge, who had been reviewing the evidence, cleared his throat and prepared to announce the verdict. When the words finally came, Clara felt a rush of overwhelming emotion. The driver was found guilty of reckless driving, endangerment, and fleeing the scene of an accident. Compensation for medical bills and emotional distress was awarded in full. The man who had caused her family pain had been held accountable, his arrogance shattered, and the truth had prevailed. Clara's knees trembled, and she gripped Michael's hand tightly. Tears streamed down her face as relief, gratitude, and a newfound sense of empowerment surged through her. She looked at her children, who were smiling softly despite the gravity of the courtroom, and realized that they had survived, and that justice had finally been served. Michael's presence remained beside her, steady and reassuring. "You did it," he whispered. "You faced it, you endured it, and you survived." Clara's voice caught in her throat as she tried to respond, but words failed her. She understood finally that survival was not merely a matter of enduring hardship. It was about courage, resilience, and having the right people by your side when the world seemed intent on breaking you. As they left the courtroom, Clara glanced back at the driver, who now avoided her gaze, his confidence replaced by the weight of truth. She felt no anger, only a profound sense of closure. Justice had been served, but more importantly, she had witnessed firsthand the difference a single person could make when they chose to act, to intervene, to stand up for what was right. Walking down the courthouse steps, Michael and Clara fell into step side by side. She felt lighter, freer, as if a burden she hadn't fully realized she carried had been lifted. The children skipped ahead, laughing quietly, and Clara knew that life had given them a rare gift: survival, courage, and the promise of a future unmarred by fear. And though the world outside remained unpredictable, she understood something fundamental. No matter how powerful or indifferent others might be, truth, courage, and resilience could always prevail. The confrontation was over, but Clara's life, and her bond with Michael, had only just begun. Life slowly began to regain its rhythm, though nothing would ever feel entirely the same. Clara woke each morning to the sound of her children's laughter, their energy filling the small apartment that now felt more like a home than it had in years. Emma had taken to drawing cheerful pictures of their daily life, taping them carefully to the refrigerator, while Leo would rush from room to room with his little toys, pretending to be a superhero, his imagination no longer stifled by fear. The accident, once a looming shadow over their lives, had started to fade, not entirely gone, but no longer able to control their world. Michael remained a constant presence, though never intrusive. His support had evolved naturally from the urgent assistance he had provided in the aftermath of the crash. He helped arrange Clara's hospital follow-ups, ensured her children were attending therapy sessions to deal with lingering trauma, and even spent quiet afternoons tutoring them when schoolwork became overwhelming. Yet his presence was more than practical, it was stabilizing. Clara began to recognize that the calm, steady force he had brought into their lives was exactly what she and her children had been missing, and she allowed herself, cautiously, to rely on it. It wasn't just the children who were healing. Clara herself was beginning to feel a shift inside her, a newfound sense of resilience she hadn't experienced in years. The weeks of fear, exhaustion, and uncertainty had tested her in ways she never imagined, but they had also revealed a strength she had long underestimated. She no longer flinched at the memory of the crash. Instead, she carried it as a reminder of how far she had come. Each day, as she prepared breakfast or packed the children's lunches, she did so with a sense of calm assurance that had been absent for far too long. Michael had quietly become a guide in her life as well. Not in a way that directed her or made decisions for her, but by opening doors she hadn't thought possible. One afternoon, he had sat across from her at their small kitchen table with a folder in hand. "I found a position for you," he said, a trace of pride in his voice. "Flexible hours, decent pay, and it'll give you time with the children without the constant stress of overworking yourself." Clara stared at the papers, her throat tightening. I don't know what to say," she murmured. She wanted to say thank you, but the depth of her gratitude seemed impossible to express. "It's more than I could have hoped for," she finally whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Michael gave her a small, understanding smile. "You've earned this," he said simply. "You've endured more than most, and now it's time to rebuild." That night, as Clara tucked her children into bed, she allowed herself a moment to breathe deeply, to reflect on the changes unfolding in their lives. Emma snuggled under the blankets, whispering, "Mom, I'm happy again," and Leo, yawning, added, "Me too." Clara's eyes welled with tears. Their innocence had returned, and with it, a sense of normalcy that felt almost miraculous. She realized that healing wasn't about erasing the past, it was about moving forward despite it, about creating moments of joy and stability that could stand against the memory of trauma. Evenings began to take on a comforting routine. Clara would cook simple meals, the smell of sautéing vegetables and simmering sauces filling the apartment, while the children played nearby or read quietly. Michael often arrived during these evenings, not to intrude, but to join them, sometimes quietly observing, sometimes helping set the table, sometimes playing with the children, as if he had been part of the family all along. There was a warmth in these moments that Clara had never expected, a sense that life could be both tender and joyful, even after darkness. One particular evening stood out. Clara had just finished preparing dinner, the aroma of garlic and herbs filling the air, when Michael arrived with a small bouquet of flowers. The children squealed in delight, Emma rushing to take them and sniffing each blossom with glee. Michael turned to Clara, holding the flowers gently in his hands. "For the strongest woman I know," he said softly, his eyes meeting hers. There was no grand gesture, no dramatics, just sincerity, simple and profound. Clara felt a warmth bloom in her chest, an unfamiliar tenderness that made her heart race and her breath catch. She smiled, unable to speak, feeling the weight of gratitude, admiration, and something deeper that she could not yet name. Michael's presence had transformed from that of a stranger to a guardian, and now to someone who touched her life in a profoundly personal way. The bond they had forged through tragedy had evolved naturally. Trust had been established through shared experience, respect through understanding, and affection through quiet, consistent care. Clara found herself seeking his advice, confiding her fears and hopes, and even laughing at the small, gentle humor he brought into their lives. She noticed that he, too, seemed to relax more around them, shedding the armor of detachment he had carried so carefully in the past. Over the weeks, Michael and Clara's interactions grew more intimate, though never forced. There were small gestures, the way he would hold the door open for her, the way he remembered the children's favorite snacks, the way he would sit with her when she was overwhelmed, simply listening without judgment. It was in these moments of quiet, mutual understanding that a deeper connection formed, one that transcended gratitude and care, hinting at the possibility of love born from trust and shared experience. Clara noticed it first in the way her heart would flutter when he entered the room, and the subtle ache she felt when he was absent. She recognized it in the warmth that spread through her chest when he praised her resilience or celebrated a small victory in the children's progress. And she saw it in the children, who had taken to him not merely as a friend, but as a presence that brought them joy, safety, and stability. It was not a love defined by passion or sudden intensity, but by quiet understanding and unwavering support. It was the kind of love that had grown from shared adversity, from witnessing courage and vulnerability in each other, from the unspoken acknowledgement that life could be both cruel and beautiful, often within the same breath. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds, Clara found herself sitting with Michael on the small balcony of their apartment. The children were playing inside, their laughter echoing faintly through the open door. She looked at him, a mixture of gratitude, respect, and affection in her eyes. "You've changed everything for us," she whispered, her voice catching with emotion. "I don't know how to ever repay you." Michael smiled softly, his gaze warm and steady. "You don't need to repay me. You've survived. You've rebuilt. That's more than enough." For the first time in years, Clara felt a sense of peace settle over her. The trauma, the fear, the uncertainty, they still existed, but they no longer defined her. Her family had been strengthened by the experience, bonded by resilience, courage, and love. And in Michael, she had found not just a guardian, but a partner, someone whose presence enriched their lives in ways she had never imagined. As the evening sky deepened into night, Clara realized that healing was not a single moment, nor was it a sudden revelation. It was a series of small steps, quiet victories, and unexpected connections that allowed life to feel full again. She looked at Michael, felt his hand brush hers, and knew that they were beginning a new chapter, one defined not by the trauma of the past, but by hope, resilience, and the promise of new beginnings. Months had passed since the courtroom confrontation, and life had settled into a rhythm of healing and quiet hope. Clara's mornings were filled with the sounds of Emma and Leo's laughter, the comforting aroma of breakfast, and the gentle hum of city life outside their small apartment. The accident that had once loomed over them like a dark cloud now felt like a distant memory, softened by resilience, love, and the quiet presence of Michael, who had become an integral part of their lives. One crisp morning, as Clara sorted through the day's mail, she noticed a large envelope with an unfamiliar return address. Her fingers trembled slightly as she picked it up, an inexplicable sense of anticipation and anxiety settling in her chest. She recognized the professional script of Michael's attorney, and her heart began to pound. Carefully, she opened the envelope, her eyes scanning the neatly typed letter. The words hit her like a tidal wave. Michael had quietly established a small trust fund in the children's names, ensuring their financial security and educational opportunities for years to come. But that was not all. He had also set up scholarships in Clara's name, dedicated to single mothers striving to rebuild their lives after hardship. The magnitude of his actions overwhelmed her. She felt tears prickle at the corners of her eyes, and she pressed the letter to her chest, struggling to breathe through the surge of emotion. Her hands shook as she called Emma and Leo over, showing them the letter. This is for you," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Emma's eyes widened. Leo blinked rapidly, not fully comprehending, but they sensed the significance in their mother's trembling voice. For the first time, Clara allowed herself to absorb the enormity of what Michael had done, not just providing temporary safety, but laying a foundation for the future. Later that day, as the children played quietly in the living room, Michael arrived, his usual calm demeanor softening when he saw the letter in Clara's hands. He knelt beside her, taking her hands gently in his. "I wanted to make sure your family would never have to worry," he said quietly, his voice almost vulnerable. "It's not just about what happened. I want you to know that your courage, your strength, and your heart deserve to be honored." Clara's chest tightened. Words failed her. How could she adequately express gratitude for someone who had entered her life during the most chaotic, terrifying moment and had changed it so profoundly? She searched his face, reading sincerity and humility in his eyes. And yet, beneath it all, there was a layer of something deeper, a quiet revelation that hinted at truths she hadn't yet uncovered. Michael continued, his tone unusually soft. "There's something else," he admitted, hesitating slightly. "Something I need you to understand about why I acted the way I did, why I stepped in that day." Clara tilted her head, sensing that the twist she had felt simmering beneath the surface had finally arrived. "I've spent my life watching from the sidelines," he began. "Wealth, privilege, and influence can insulate you from reality. I saw pain, injustice, and fear every day, but I didn't act. I believed that someone else would, that it wasn't my responsibility. Then that day happened, you and your children, in that accident, and everything changed." His voice faltered slightly, and Clara felt her pulse quicken. "I realized that life is too short to merely observe. Courage isn't about money or status, it's about heart. And your heart, Clara, your bravery, your resilience, showed me what real courage looks like." Clara's eyes welled with tears as the words sank in. She had always viewed herself as ordinary, a single mother struggling to survive, unaware of the profound impact her actions had on others. And yet here was Michael, a man of immense power and influence, confessing that she had transformed his perspective, reshaping the very way he approached life. The twist was astonishing. Not only had he saved them, but in saving them, he had also revealed the depth of his own humanity. She took a deep breath, finally finding her voice. "You didn't just help us, Michael. You changed our lives, and somehow, in the process, you changed yourself too." Her hands trembled as she reached out, touching his face gently. I don't even know how to thank you for this." Michael shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "No thanks needed," he said softly. "The truth is, I was the one who needed this, to see that real courage exists in people like you, people who face adversity and keep moving forward, even when the world seems determined to crush them." In that moment, Clara understood something profound. Life had intertwined their paths in ways neither of them could have anticipated. The accident, horrifying and traumatic as it had not only saved her children and given her family a second chance, it had also catalyzed a transformation in Michael, one that would ripple through his life and those around him. The chaos that had struck their lives had given birth to something far greater: trust, hope, and a bond that could not be broken. The final revelation came quietly, almost tenderly, in the hours that followed. As Clara sat with Michael in the sunlit living room, watching Emma and Leo play, he took her hands in his again. "I need you to know this," he said. "This isn't just about gratitude or responsibility. I wanted you to see that your life matters, that courage matters, that people like you, people who refuse to give up, can change the world around them, even if they don't realize it." Clara's chest tightened, tears spilling freely as she hugged him tightly. She felt the weight of every fear, every sleepless night, every struggle, release in that single embrace. Their lives, forever intertwined by tragedy, were now united in hope and love. From the wreckage of fear and uncertainty had sprung resilience, trust, and a future brighter than she had dared to imagine. And yet, as they held each other, the story did not feel like it was concluding. It felt like it was only beginning. The children's laughter echoed in the background, filling the room with life and light, a constant reminder that every hardship they had endured had led to this moment. Michael's quiet generosity, his humility, and the profound twist of his confession had transformed their world, leaving Clara with a sense of awe and gratitude she could barely articulate. Clara realized that the accident, the chaos, and the fear had all been catalysts, not just for survival, but for transformation. They had revealed the depths of human courage, the importance of acting when it mattered, and the beauty of unexpected bonds formed in moments of crisis. And as she looked at Michael and then at her children, she knew that life had given them a rare gift, not just safety, not just justice, but a chance to embrace hope, love, and the limitless possibilities of a future they would create together. In the quiet of the sunlit room, Clara finally understood the ultimate truth of the past months, that sometimes the greatest twists in life are not tragedies themselves, but the unexpected ways people respond to them. And in the midst of heartbreak, fear, and uncertainty, life had given her a second chance, not just to survive, but to thrive, to love, and to witness the extraordinary courage of both herself and the man who had entered their lives at the moment of greatest need. From that day forward, the story of Clara, her children, and Michael was no longer defined by tragedy. It was defined by hope, resilience, and the profound truth that the human heart, when guided by compassion, courage, and love, could create miracles even in the aftermath of despair. And as the sunlight danced across the room, illuminating the children's smiles, Clara and Michael knew, with absolute certainty, that their journey, born of heartbreak and bravery, was only just beginning.